Good day, everyone. We are going to talk about intonation and juncture for today. Under intonation, we have rising intonation, falling intonation, rise fall intonation, and fall rise intonation. But before we get into those concepts, let's first define what intonation is. So, intonation and stress are actually closely linked. And in fact, it's impossible to disassociate them because they go hand in hand. If you can still remember the lecture that I've made about stress, we emphasize the need and importance of giving an emphasis to every syllable of a particular word. And intonation plays an important role on how words are stressed in a sentence. And additionally, intonation is about how we say things rather than what we say. So the way the voice rises and falls when speaking, in other words, is the music of the language. We say that intonation is the music of the language because once we utter group of words in a sentence in a communication, if you can notice, there is a difference in pronunciation on how people say it. So that is what we call intonation. In addition, the voice tends to rise, fall, or remain flat depending on the meaning or feeling we want to convey. For example, our emotions such as being surprised, being angry, having that interest, when we are bored, when we are feeling grateful. So, intonation therefore indicates the mood of the speaker. So, definitely every message that a speaker wants to convey has something to do with his or her feelings. And therefore, there are two basic patterns of intonation in English. We have the falling intonation and rising intonation. Basically, we have these two, but later on we'll talk about the other two. So, in the following examples, a downward arrow indicates that it is a falling intonation, and an upward arrow indicates that it is a rising intonation. So, let's go first with the falling intonation. So, what are the kind of sentences that are being considered as falling intonation? So the pitch of the voice in falling intonation falls at the end of the sentence. So falling intonation is the most common intonation pattern in English, especially if we are just stating a fact and the opinion. So falling intonation again has a symbol of an arrow going down. So it's commonly found in statements, in commands or requests, in WH questions, specifically in information questions, confirmatory question tags, and exclamations. So here we have an example. So for statements, when we say statements, these are just sentences that has one idea. So first we have nice to meet you. Number 2, I'll be back in a minute. Number 3, she doesn't live here anymore. Number 4, Dad wants to change his car. Number 5, here is the weather forecast. Number 6, cloudy weather is expected at the end of the week. 7, we should work together more often. Number 8, I'm going for a walk in the park. As you can see, these are just purely statements. Okay, there are no conversations made, and these statements can also be considered as a declarative sentence which ends in period. And usually, these statements are under falling intonation, or the last words of those statements are usually using falling intonation. So remember that, guys. Next, we have the commands. So, commands meaning we are asking someone to do something. Number 1, we have write your name here. Number 2, show me what you've written. Number 3, leave it on the desk. Number 4, take that picture down. Number 5, Throw that out. Number 6, put your books on the table. 7, take your hands out of your pockets. So, as we can see here, these are still statements but under commands, meaning we are asking someone to do something. So, if you are doing a command or a request, we usually tend to um, use falling intonation, especially if we are about to end our statements. So, that is for commands. Now we move on to WH questions, or the who, what, when, and where questions, requesting information such as those beginning with who, what, why, where, when, which, and how. So these are what we call the 5 wives and 1 husband questions. Number 1, let's try to read this all together and notice the falling intonation as you utter these words. So, number 1, what country do you come from? Number 2, where do you work? Number 3, which of them do you prefer? Number 4, when does the shop open? Number 5, how many books have you bought? Number 6, which coat is yours? Number 7, whose bag is this? So, as you can notice, the last words on each of the statements here are using falling intonation. So first, we do a falling intonation if the statements are declarative sentence or statements, if these are commands, and if they are WH questions. So aside from those, we also have those that are questions tags. So what are these question tags? So these are statements requesting confirmation rather than questions. So it is emphasized here that not all tag questions are really questions, because some of them merely ask for confirmation or invite agreement, in which case we use a falling tone at the end of the sentence. So, first sentence we have, he thinks he's so clever, doesn't he? Number 2, she's such a nuisance, isn't she? Number 3, I failed the test because I didn't revise. Did I? Number 4, it doesn't seem to bother him much, does it? So instead of asking a question, you are rather asking for a confirmatory answer from your listener. So it sounds like that. So those are the things that you need to tone down your voice at the end of the statement, because those are under falling intonation. Again, when we say falling intonation, the sentences that requires it are the statements when we are doing a command, when we are using WH questions, and when we are using question tags. So those are the falling intonation. Now we move on to rising intonation. Now this one has the pitch of the voice rising at the end of the sentence, and it has a symbol of this arrow going up. So rising intonation invites the speaker to continue talking, and it's normally used with yes or no questions and question tags that are real questions. So let's first have the yes or no questions, or the questions that can be answered by yes or no. Number 1, do you like your new teacher? Number 2, have you finished already? Number 3, may I borrow your dictionary? Number 4, do you have any magazines? And number 5, do you sell stamps? So, as you can notice in the statements while I utter them, the words at the end of the sentence are going up. So, those are indication that a sentence is written in a rising intonation. So, as long as the last word is going up, then, and additionally, if it's a yes or no question, then we consider that as a statement or a sentence that uses rising intonation. So actually, when we ask questions that require yes or no questions, we usually tend to emphasize the last words of the sentence by means of using the rising intonation to signify and convey or emphasize what we really mean. Okay, so that's for yes or no question. What about question tags that show uncertainty and require an answer or real questions? We say real questions because we are looking for factual answer or possible questions. In here, you do not ask questions that are impossible to answer. If, for example, you're asking a question that requires reading a book, then it's not under real questions. You ask real questions based on the situation that you are in or the real ones in a real world. Okay? First sentence we have, we've met already, haven't we? Number two, you like fish, don't you? Number three, you're a new student, aren't you? Number four, the view is beautiful, isn't it? So the tag questions here are the ones that uses rising intonation. So that's for the real questions. The falling intonation that we've mentioned a while back regarding the question tags are still under falling intonation because they are not under the real questions. But in here, in rising intonation, we consider that statement requires a rising intonation if it is a real question. Okay. But sometimes there are consideration in using uh, rising and falling intonation because we can actually mix the both of them. So we sometimes use a combination of rising and falling intonation in the same sentence. So the combination is called rise fall intonation or fall rise intonation. Let's go first with the rise fall intonation. So as the word implies, the intonation rises and then falls. So we use rise fall intonation. Take note of this for choices, lists, unfinished thoughts, and conditional sentences. So let's go first with the choices or the alternative questions. So these choices or these questions require one answer from the mentioned choices in the question. So number one, we have, are you having soup or salad? Number two, is John leaving on Thursday or Friday? Number three, does he speak German or French? Number four, is your name Ava or Eva? So if you can notice, the two options that are mentioned in the question, the first word or choice is being risen up, while the other one, the latter, requires the falling intonation. So those are under the rise and fall intonation. If we are asking questions that require choices from our listeners. Okay. Next, we also have the lists. So in here, we use the rising, 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 and falling, or the rise, fall intonation. So intonation falls on the last item to show that the list is finished. Okay, so number one, we've got apples, pears, bananas, and oranges. So we fall down at the last word to signify or tell our readers that we are already done listing the choices that we are mentioning in our questions. Number two, the sweater comes in blue, white, pink, and black. So, did you notice the intonation as it rises and falls down at the end of the statement? Number three, I like football, tennis, basketball, and volleyball. Number four, I bought a t shirt, a skirt, and a handbag. So, as a listener of a speaker, you know that statement has already ended or the choices has been ended by the speaker if it finishes at a falling intonation, following the fall and the rise and fall intonation rather in stating their messages. Next, under rise and fall intonation, we have the unfinished thoughts or the partial statements. So, in the responses to the following questions, the rise fall intonation indicates reservation, or you are not actually sure of your answer, or there is actually a message that you want to convey, but it is evident on how you say your statement beforehand. So, first, we have the speaker hesitates to fully express his or her thoughts. So, do you like my new handbag? Asked the speaker. So, the one answered, well, the leather is nice, but I don't like it. So, this intonation is or can actually give the listener a or an understanding that what he or she really means is the opposite of what he or she wants to tell the speaker. So it's the other way around. So you can actually identify or notice that your listener or your interlocutor is lying the way he or she states his or her messages. So, as humans, we have that instinct actually, and it applies also in the English language. So, next example, we have what was the meal like? The fish was good, but the rest wasn't great. So, actually, aside from the first statement that is mentioned, we can also use the rise and fall intonation if we are actually not satisfied with what we have felt or what we have experienced, especially if you are eating in a restaurant and someone asks you if they enjoyed or if you enjoyed the meal that was being served on the table, and usually you would say, I really like it. So that intonation would actually give you the meaning that some choices from the menu, for example, is not really good as it's shown in the second statement. So number three, we also have, so you both live in Los Angeles. Well, Alex does, but I don't. So usually, even without finishing the sentences in a particular statement, the way how people um, use the rise and falling intonation in their sentences when they are uttering it may give us the message that uh, we really want to hear. And with that, we can actually tell how they really feel. That is why in using intonations in a sentence, it really requires an energy or feeling. The meaning is really different if you are feeling happy or sad. So you can say, I love you in a happy manner. But when you are sad and you say, I love you, it tells people a different message. So that's how powerful intonation is in a sentence. And it's really essential, especially when we are communicating verbally, because these ones are not really evident when we are writing. Because when we are writing, we usually use the symbol um, like this, the slant line, to signify that there is a pause in a sentence or there is a cut in a sentence, or you need to stop right in there, okay, to further understand the statements that will follow. So, aside from those, we can also consider the conditional sentences in the rise fall intonation. So, these in here, the tone rises in the first clause meaning at the first statement, and then it falls gradually in the second clause. So, first one, we have if he calls, ask him to leave a message. Number two, unless he insists, I'm not going to go. Number three, if you have any problems, just contact us. So these are usually the statements that we hear from the movies that we are watching, from the people that we are encountering, from the books that we are reading. So if they are really used in a verbal manner, then we make use of the rise fall intonation because this is a conditional sentences. So the first statement requires a rising intonation while the latter requires a falling intonation. Okay? So that is for rise and fall intonation. Let's go to the last one, the fall rise intonation. So in here, the voice falls and rises usually within one word. So it's the opposite of the other one, the rise and fall intonation. In here, we first have the fall intonation before the rise or rising intonation. So the main function of fall rise intonation is to show that the speaker is not certain of the answer and they are giving to a question or is reluctant to reply as opposed to a falling tone used when there is no hesitation. And it is also used in polite requests or suggestions. So we have an example here for hesitation or reluctance. Number one, so you'd be willing to confirm that? Well, I suppose so. Number two, you didn't see him on Monday. I don't quite remember. So actually, when we are not sure of what we are going to tell our the speaker or someone that we are talking to, we usually have this intonation where we sometimes have a rise fall intonation, and most of the time we use the fall and rise intonation if we are not actually sure of our answer. So, for example, someone asks you if you have eaten already, but since you are shy to say that you have not yet eaten, but you have told the person that you've already eaten, you say, "Oh, I've already eaten." So, like that, it says or it tells your reader that your message actually means that you haven't eaten yet. Yet you give the speaker the message that you have already eaten. And actually, we are good at that. We, if not most of the time, sometimes we are actually good at pretending. Okay, sometimes also when we are hesitant in speaking, especially when we are asked to speak in front and we are not yet sure of what we are going to tell the audience or our classmates, the teachers in the classroom, we use the fall and rise intonation. Kasi it's under the fall and rise intonation because at the beginning of the statements, you are not actually that sure, but as you go along your statements, you utter the words that you think are right. You're actually gathering the thoughts. Okay, you're actually remembering the things that you are wanting to say to your audience, and then you go up and use the rising intonation for assuring your readers or your audience that you are already sure for what you are telling them. Okay, so that's for hesitation and reluctance. We also have politeness and doubt or uncertainty. So you are not sure what the answer might be, so you use the fall and rise intonation. So this is related to what I've just mentioned a while back. Number one, we have perhaps we could visit the place. Number two, should we copy the list? Number three, do you think it's allowed? So it usually you sound uncertain if this is the kind of intonation that you're going to ask a person with. So, number three, do you think it's allowed? So, by the way, how allowed is uttered or it's being injected with an intonation, we can already gather our thoughts that the speaker is not sure of what he or she is saying. So that's for fall and rise intonation. We have when we are hesitant and if we are reluctant, and also when we are showing politeness or uncertainty in communicating. So that's for intonation. Let me just inject the concept about juncture, because juncture is very important in communication as also in written communication, because it gives the message more meaning, and it makes you as the speaker understand the listener what you are telling them. So, what is the juncture? It's actually another measure of intonation, and it characterizes the passage from one sound to the next sound in the stream of speech. So, basically, juncture interposes a temporary stoppage of the flow of speech. Remember when you are still in elementary, you were asked before to read a particular excerpt or a passage from a book, and then you notice that one of your classmates actually, while reading a sentence that really requires a period at the end of the word, but still he or she continues without stopping. So, by that, you cannot actually understand what he or she is telling you. And the pause in here, or the juncture that I'm talking here, um, can use the symbol period or comma. Most of the time, comma, because we cannot actually utter the whole idea of what we are telling people if we will not stop. Because stop in a statement or in verbal communication, since we always communicate with people, it's very important to make a stop or make a pause instead, to give way for the other ideas to be understood. Now let's have an example here. So in this sentence, woman without her man is nothing, we can actually have two meanings by just putting a slash on a particular word. So on the first sentence we have woman, woman without her man is nothing. While number two, woman without her man is nothing. So juncture or pause is really important in a statement or when we are communicating, because once you misplaced your pause in a particular word, it may actually sound different from your listener. So, what you mean might not be actually understood by your listener, because on how you make a stop, on how you expresses your thoughts and ideas. So make sure that also in writing, most especially that in the future you'll be able to write different reports or different letters, okay, in your professions later on. You will realize the importance also of um, the use of the different punctuations in creating and constructing a sentence. And most especially, once you are being interviewed by your employer, you may actually create an outstanding impression about you on how you expresses your thoughts. So make sure that you're not nervous by that time. So actually, when you are nervous, you tend to actually speak straight. So make sure to compose yourself. Okay. Um, Breathe in and breathe out, and make sure that you are not talking too fast and too slow, and make sure that in every words that you are uttering, you are telling your interlocutor or the one you are communicating with, there is a pause, okay, so that they'll be able to understand what you are saying, and in order for a good communication to occur. Okay, so that's for junction and juncture rather, and intonation.